Coming to you from Music City,
Nashville, Tennessee,
the definitive arts and entertainment podcast.
Hello, guys and gals. Welcome to Turn It On. My name is Michael J. This is my new show. Thank you so much for taking the time to check it out. I hope you guys are all doing well. I am doing the intro for today's show from my car because I can. And it's a beautiful sunny day here in Nashville. And to be quite honest with you, I mentioned in the very first podcast that I was going to keep this as real as possible. And in Nashville, there are quite a few people who like to keep up appearances, and I've just never been one of those people. So, truth be told, I work a day job. I have been for a while actually now. I wish that I was making my living doing only music, but not quite there yet. You know, some people are lucky enough to do that, and those gigs are few and far between, and in this community here, we all kind of hustle our way to making the next buck. So anyway, I do medical courier work during the day, and it's not a bad job. It's actually quite flexible, and I get to drive around all day, all around Nashville and the surrounding areas, and it's rewarding work. It's important work. I'm delivering medical samples from hospitals to clinics and all those kind of things, and the company I work for, fortunately, is flexible enough with my touring schedule to allow me to go and tour for days at a time or on the weekends from like a Thursday to a Sunday. And it works out really well. That way, you know, when I'm not working during the week, I'm working a regular day job from 8 in the morning until 7 at night. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of driving, and it's tiring. And usually when I get home from work, I start playing guitar around 7:30, 8 o'clock and play till I can't stand up anymore and go to bed. And I can listen to songs in the car, and usually I'm singing in the car when I'm driving around, so it's not bad. So anyway, that's what I'm doing today. I'm on a small break right now, so I just decided to do the intro to the next show. Having said that, it has been a tremendously busy time for me as of late. If you listen to the last episode, you might remember me mentioning that I had a few upcoming gigs with country artist Chuck Wicks. One of those gigs was the Grand Ole Opry last Friday, and it was fantastic as always and way too quick as always. I had started playing with Chuck when I first moved to Nashville and was with him for about 11 months in the capacity of rhythm guitarist and high harmony singer. Well, these last two gigs, I was filling in for my friend Chris Nix on lead guitar and middle harmony parts, which means I had to learn the entire show again from the ground up. And it was a challenge, but I rose to it, and I'm, very pleased with the way things came across. And Chuck was very happy, and everybody that was at the gigs was very happy. After the Opry gig, we hopped the tour bus down to Navarre Beach, Florida, and played a festival with Big and Rich, which was a lot of fun. And a few guys on the gig were friends that I had known for a long time, so it was kind of like catching up with some old buddies and getting to meet some new ones. And that was a great show, and by the end of it, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Big and Rich at all or what they have going on. They had set up a bar, an actual bar in the middle of their stage where the drum riser would normally be, and had a giant bottle of Crown, and I think there was some other beverages kind of floating around, but we got asked up on stage about halfway through their show and ended up just standing up there drinking Crown out of a giant bottle. So it was a lot of fun. And this coming weekend, I'll be going down to Sweetwater, Texas with a country artist named Matt Marinchik. I've been learning songs for his set, and we're opening up for Thompson Square down there in Texas. And then when I get back, Brandon Ray, who is an artist who is signed to Sony ATV, actually was on the Chuck Wicks gig with us, and took the spot that I used to have as rhythm guitarist and high harmony singer. He called me and asked me if they were going to be doing some gigs around Nashville, and asked me if I wanted to sort of start playing with them a little bit. So on top of learning a full set for Matt Marinchik, I've also been learning another 12 songs on top of that to do some gigs with Brandon Ray. So it doesn't stop, and it's a good thing. I was talking with somebody about just after the Opry gig and just after that exciting couple gigs I got to do. They were asking what kind of emotional toll those sort of things take, because they always do. And the way I put it was, what goes up must come down. And there's been a lot of highs, which are the craziest highs you can imagine, but you always got to come down from those things. And I don't think most people realize that, but I firmly understand how some big stars or big artists get dependent on drugs and alcohol, because you need something to sustain you between those highs. And if you're an artist or a musician at my level, not every week is filled with thousands of screaming fans and all that kind of thing. And not that I need that in my life, but it's pretty cool when it happens. And I've learned to temper that, and I've learned to realize that when I have an exciting event in my life that happens like that, I mean, those are the bucket list gigs. Those are the things that I've worked for my whole life, and to be actually fulfilling those dreams now and to be doing those things is quite a reward in and of itself. But there are moments of crippling self-doubt in between all of that stuff. And I know it's fucking ridiculous. And I've had friends and family members call me out on that. But after the gigs, I tend to kind of retreat into this humble space, and like I said, it's more of a self-doubt area. I tend to be my own worst enemy in that department. I'm getting better at trying to silence the voices in my head and to tell myself, hey, look, you made it this far, you're doing this. Working the day job keeps me humble, and at this point, like I said in the last episode, the phone is ringing. So I guess I should be happy with all that and realize that some people's phones aren't ringing. So I'm happy to be busy. I'm happy to not be sleeping much these days. And I'm happy to be in Nashville, to be honest with you. There were a couple years that were not the greatest when I first moved here, and it was definitely a leap being, the age that I am and leaving the comfort zone down in Florida. But I'm so glad I did it. And it's moments like playing the Opry and then getting on a honest to goodness tour bus and going down and playing a festival with one of country's biggest acts doesn't suck, and hopefully there'll be more of that stuff. But I don't do this for the money. I don't do it for any other reason than the fact that I love music, and I love musicians, and I love playing with other musicians, and I love that I'm continuing to learn about my craft, and I'm learning more about my instruments, and more about writing songs. And I'm kind of like a sponge lately. I haven't stopped. I think maybe the day that I feel like there's nothing else to learn is the day that I might want to quit, and I hope that day never comes. My guest on the program today is a longtime friend of mine, one of the best drummers in the world, in my opinion, and in others' opinions as well, a guy named Tom Hurst. Tommy is currently the drummer for country star Tracy Lawrence, and the list of people that he's played for through the years is quite staggering, actually. John Mayer, the Backstreet Boys, Sister Hazel, House of Dreams, Bucky Covington, 80s star Tiffany, Wang Chung from the 80s. Those are just a few off the top of my head, but Tommy's been doing this forever. And he and I go back roughly 15 years at this point. And for 8 or 9 of those years, we played in a band together down in Gainesville, Florida with our other friend, Chris Nix. And it was kind of a unique situation. I had met Tommy through a mutual friend named Greg Ema, and I was always looking to put a band together down there. I enjoyed the solo acoustic work, but there's really no substitute to playing with other people. So Tommy and I got thrown together on a gig that my friend Greg couldn't make, so he subbed me into it. And we took a 2-hour drive down to Orlando, ended up playing a Christmas party. Never played together before, but the show went off without a hitch. And Tommy and I realized that we had a lot of similar tastes in music. And Tom introduced me to Chris Nix, and those guys kind of just started showing showing up to my regular gig that I had at a place called Dirty Nelly's on Thursdays in Gainesville. And before long, word started spreading, and we were drawing enough people to have lines out the door every week. And we held that gig for about 9 years. And I don't think Tom or Chris were getting paid when we first started the gig. And it did so well that, I negotiated with the club owners on their behalf and ended up getting them a paycheck for that. So we did this every week for a long time and got to know one another quite well as people. And they're still, Tom and Chris are still two of my closest friends in the world. And both of them are clearly the reason why I'm here in Nashville now and why I'm able to be doing what I'm doing, because they both were pushing me quite hard to move here. And I'm really, really glad they did, because I get to do a lot of cool things now. Tom has been one of my biggest cheerleaders since I moved here, and he's never hesitated to recommend me to anybody at the drop of a hat without even thinking about it. And it means a lot to me. I can't tell you the amount of respect I have for this man and all that he does and all that he manages to cram into his very busy life. Every time I think I'm working hard, I kind of measure it against Tom Hurst, and I always realize, man, I got a lot of work to do. So I want to thank Tommy for being as candid as he was in this interview. He talks about some pretty personal stuff, and I really appreciate his willingness and his trust that he put in me in order to talk about the things that he did. And I think the talk is captivating. I think it's very interesting, and I really hope it gives you guys a little bit of insight into the man that is and has been my friend for the better part of 15 years now. And before we get to my talk with Tom Hurst, got to do a little business here. We here at Turn It On are always looking for sponsors. If you or anybody that you know wishes to advertise on our show here, please get with us on the contact page at tiopod.com, and we will work out something that is mutually beneficial for you and for us. And we might be starting a GoFundMe page in just a little bit here, but we do have a PayPal donation button on the homepage at tiopod.com. You don't have to donate. We are in desperate need of some new equipment, some microphones, and a MacBook. Even if you guys have something you want to donate, we will consider taking anything. Hence the fact that I'm doing this intro in my car on an iPhone. Any little bit helps, and I will keep talking about this until we get enough money to make these things happen. So if you like the show and you like what's going on, please drop us even $1 or $2 would be a huge help. And if you also like what you're hearing, tell a friend, tell 5 friends. We're trying to get the word out about Turn It On, and we've got more episodes coming your way in the very near future. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this talk with the very talented Tom Hurst.
I don't know how you do it, man. That's like one of those things where you're the most busy person I've ever met.
Well, and it's just different though. It's like, you guys, like, think about it. Each of us, like, I've always so admired how diligent you are when you're working on projects and stuff. When you take something on, you go and dig in, and you're going to do every facet of it.
Yeah.
I'm so bad at that. I'm the guy that gives up after 5 minutes. I like put up some microphones and something doesn't work, and I'm like, whereas also you crank out an album in a week or something, You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the gene that allows me to half-ass anything for some reason. I don't know how to do it.
No, you're not. And the thing is, exactly. Like, that shows up for me in different places. For me, it's in academia.
Sure.
I like with teaching and things like that. That's something I get real focused on,
right?
And it's probably why, like, Nick's always calls me Murray, when it comes to organizing things, putting on events, bringing people together. I mean, I should have, and I may still. That's the other thing. Who knows? Maybe I'll work in management. Everyone I know is like, dude, why don't you just become a manager?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I don't know though, man. My winning personality at times, I'm not very good at the massaging people. I'm the good hammer. I'm not the most diplomatic guy.
Well, I think it would be a disservice to everybody else to not hear you play too.
Well,
I mean, that's just one of those things.
And that's the thing. It's like you said. It's the same. That's when we've been texting about you. I mean, that's the thing. It would be a travesty for people not to have, or for you not to be in the mix in a community like this, because you offer so much. I think if I'm most proud of our little circle of guys, when you look at Sizemore, you, Nix, me, Britton,
sure,
any of the Gainesville guys, man, we deliver. That's the number one thing. You will not see us fail.
Right.
Fail. Like that's why I was saying about it's like, oh gosh, nobody can control who's going to hire you, fire you.
Oh yeah. Sure.
They look at you. You wore the wrong color that day.
Right.
But in terms of, it won't be because you weren't prepared, and it won't be because you weren't damn good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I kind of, people always have the peach pickers, there's the music mafia. Well, I feel like our little Gainesville crew, some pretty bad dudes.
Absolutely.
And that's, that's the thing. I mean, like when Richie Stano used to come up here and play, that's all the people are like, man, who's this guitar player? He's great,
Yeah.
So that part is, to me, I so admire that with you. Is like, dude, and it's why it makes me happy to see you doing this kind of, especially like you said, stuff that's not necessarily, nothing against country. Hey man, I'm thrilled to be employed.
Right.
But when you get to actually do music that I know how passionate you are about, and I think about groups that you love, and the thing that isn't funny, the irony of that for all of us, that the very thing that you always are looking for throughout, I know at least definitely most of my career and stuff, I never would have guessed how the town has completely moved to where it is the LA, it is the center for pop music, and because of all the TV shows and the way they all feed into this, and that New York and LA are not near as ready to support. Nashville's perfect because of the way how efficient and fast that everyone can, everyone here's so versatile.
Right. Well, this is the center of the musical universe.
Really,
right now.
it truly is now.
Yeah.
We all appreciate elements of country.
Sure.
Like I said, I love working for Tracy. I never would have guessed I liked it as much as I do.
Oh yeah, good songs are good songs.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah, you've been with Tracy Lawrence for 2 years now?
Yeah, this will be it'll be 2 years next in about 2 weeks.
How did you get hooked up with that?
God, that's funny. That came out of clear, left field. I don't think you've ever met him, but our Elliot is a guy that Chris and I worked with that band Houston County a few years back. They were on James Stroud's label on Stradivarius, and I had been doing a lot of playing with them, and this guy Elliot was their production manager, and he did a lot of, and he's an engineer too. He does a lot of work for Loud Masterphonics.
Yeah.
And so real talented, young guy. But we just hit it off and became buds. And so we would, and he would do monitors and do production stuff. And I recommended him for a few things, like with Chuck. He didn't end up doing Chuck's gig, but he and Howard Bennett, Bearded Howard.
Sure.
I introduced them. They became buds. And just Elliot, when we first put the studio downstairs, and for a while we had a console here when Chris and I were first doing all that. And Elliot was involved with all that. Okay. So he just is a good friend. And I didn't think anything of it. Well, he got hired by Tracy. Probably back, I was still with Bucky. This is when I was
Bucky Covington.
No, sorry, I wasn't with Bucky. It was my first was with Chuck.
Okay.
I think he got the job. Not long after I got the gig with Chuck, Elliot got hired. Because I started with Chuck in late '09, and so they, we just kind of kept in touch. And I knew Tracy's drummer really well at the time, Cliff, and they, I was friends with a few of the guys, but I didn't really know the camp. I just had opened a ton of shows for Tracy with Trent Tomlinson, with Bucky Covington, with Chuck. I was always opening for Tracy. I'd probably play open for him 2-3 times a year. Well, little do I know that all through that time, Darren Favorite and Elliot are in TL's ear about me. And so that's how that started happening. And Cliff had left the group. He had been there for a while, and they'd got another guy, Chris Anderson. Chris was with them for almost 3 years, probably. And I guess they just, they still kind of were looking for something different. And they wanted somebody that had more of a background in kind of triplet music, like triplet bass music, like, shuffles and swing. Because Tracy does a lot of that kind of stuff. Slow waltzes to really fast flying shuffles.
Right.
And playing jazz like I do, that's kind of fit me. So, but the funny thing is, Mike, is I felt like I couldn't get arrested at that time. Prior to when they called me, I had been just learning gig after gig. I went to Singapore with Tiffany. I had subbed for Gary Allen. I'd subbed for James Otto. I'd subbed for, what's her name? Katie Armiger.
Okay.
So I'm learning all these people's shows and stuff. And, Chuck had no work. We weren't playing at all.
Right.
But I was technically still Chuck's drummer.
Yeah.
And just one night I was coming out of a lesson, and my phone rings at 615. So I was like, oh yeah, hello. And it's like, hey, this is Joe Caverly. And I was like, he says, I'm with Tracy Lawrence. And I said, I said, and my first thought initially is like, no way. And he's like, yeah, man, Elliot has told us about you, and I came out to see you play at the Wild Horse a couple months ago. I've been playing with these guys, Brother Trouble. They were actually on that label Chuck's on, Blaster.
Oh, okay.
And so it's kind of a small world, but Sean Fuller, Florida Georgia Lions drummer, had been playing with them after he got let go from Justin Moore. Okay. And so he called me up one day and says, look, I can't tell you who, but I'm about to start a pretty serious gig. I think it's going to be big. Yeah. And the funny thing is I already kind of had an inkling because I thought, I wonder if he's talking about Florida Georgia Line, because I knew Jason Schmidt, who was their current member. Okay. And I'm like, oh, I hope it's not Schmitty, and it both ways, because Sean and I go way back and we're buds. Okay. But I was kind of like, I didn't want it, well, and I, kind of inkling. But anyway, Shawnee was just like, man, could you cover some dates? I knew you had mentioned that you weren't that busy with Chuck. I said, yeah, dude, what do you got? And he said, well, these are real nice guys. So I started playing with this Brother Trouble group, kind of like the Low Cash Cowboys. It was kind of party rock. They're real nice guys. Good. And so I played with them, and I guess unbeknownst to me, Joe came and saw us one night here in town. And so that was kind of the final. But the funny thing is, Elliot had sent me like some cryptic text like 4 months prior saying, would you be interested in a gig that paid this much, worked this much a year? And I mean, I'm thinking, you're describing your job. I'm like, dude, you're not really being, I'm not, it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what you're talking about here. But I was like, so my response was, yes, smiley face. And and Joe, I mean, it was funny though, Mike, it was like, Joe asked me, so would you be interested in the gig? I said, yeah, gosh, yeah. I said, do you understand? I said, I really don't have a lot of, I said, I mean, you guys are really traditional country. He said, no, man, we've seen you play lots. He says, we're not worried about that. He says, you come pretty highly recommended. And, I was like, well, man, that's cool, and he said, the main thing is just, you need to, can you learn these 26 songs and be ready to go 2 weeks from now? And I'm like, heck yeah, let's do that. I said, and the funny thing is, I'm thinking to myself, Heather and I had been keeping track at that point before starting TL's gig, because I'd also done this cover band, this, what are they called? They're like total high energy, really great band. And Burning Las Vegas, that's the group I'm playing with. Man, those guys had like 70 or 80 tunes, so I had to learn. And I mean, it's some stuff I knew, but they had medleys and stuff. So I had been saying to Heather, I said, do you realize this year I think I have transcribed and learned something like 432 songs. This is before I started, and I just now this is just starting 2013, of course, for TL. And I'm like, and Tracy has a huge catalog. Right. I'm like, hey, I'm glad to be working. But I was like, oh my, I know what it was. I'd been subbing for Sister Hazel that year too, a lot for Mark, since I had more time. Yeah. And they had all kind of new material. Here, we do this. So I'm like, can I just get in one gig for a while? So that was, and literally, I immediately felt comfortable there. Like, we're all so different, and yet I was like, man, I like these guys.
It works, yeah.
Yeah, and my main concern was just hoping that they liked me, and they've been great to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you from Gainesville originally?
Oh yeah. Well, technically no. I mean, I was born in New Bern, North Carolina, but that was literally because my dad was working in an engineering firm. They were working on Camp Lejeune, and my mom was pregnant with me, and it just so happened that when she went into labor, we were there because he had just finished the contracting. They were moving. We actually moved to Crystal River, Florida. And so I lived in Crystal River, and as old as I am, so we spent 69 in Crystal River. So about my first year of my life, and then we moved to Gainesville for Dad to go back to school. And so I've been in Gainesville since like 1970. Was
he a military guy?
He was what do you call it? Airborne. Army Airborne.
Oh, okay.
So he had done that, and for some reason, I think maybe because they had me or something, they didn't send him overseas at the time because it was still Vietnam. So I don't know why he didn't get deployed. I think he would be going back to school. But anyways, he was working for an engineering firm because back in those days, he hadn't finished his degree. He had gone to school at Alabama and then gone to Ole Miss. My dad's big claim to fame is he dated, what's her name? Marianne Mobley, that was Miss America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when he was at Ole Miss. Yeah, it sounds like he was on the same plan I was when he was young.
I was going to say.
Party and take some classes.
was gonna say
it wasn't
sounds familiar.
Yeah, and then he came to Gainesville, and I mean, I can remember we lived in a trailer out there on Parker Road, and that's they bought some land, and then Dad hunkered down. He finished his engineering degree there, and then went to work for ESE, which is a big environmental firm.
Okay.
So so that's kind of how we ended up in Gainesville.
Oh, so how old were you when you ended up in Gainesville?
So that would be I was a year old.
Oh, so
yeah,
you were
about
like,
a year and a half is when we actually moved to Parker. What's like? I think it's whatever where Diamond Sports and all that stuff is way out on West.
Yeah,
that's like the family church. Remember Greg Doles?
Sure,
and all those guys?
yeah.
My house, that crazy double frame house that my parents built, is like directly across the street from the family church.
Really?
There.
Okay.
So, but that was you can imagine in 1970, 71, dirt road, nothing,
right. Nothing out there,
woods.
Yeah.
Well, that's my pops was like real. I mean, like I said, airborne, race dragsters, cave dive. He's like a little bit of like, his plan was by the time I was about 10, he wanted us to move to Western Canada and live like way up in the...
Really?
Oh, yeah. My mom was like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. He's like, I want to live off the land, get off the grid.
Right.
So, I think in a way the cave diving thing might have been a blessing in disguise.
So what's the deal with that?
Dad, he was real heavy duty, and because of his background in engineering, he was hydrology. Like today, that he would be considered an environmental engineer, but they called it back then geological engineering.
Okay.
Dad's big reason he wanted to be in North Florida is he had always been into spelunking, dry caving as a kid, because he grew up in parts of northern Alabama and spent some time in West Virginia, because of where my grandparents were from. And so he was huge into anything to do with caves and cave systems. And then coming to North Florida, he learned about underwater caves and the spring system.
There's a lot of it there.
Exactly. And then in going to school, he's studying with all these guys, and it's all about the water table and how the aquifer in North Florida is such a unique situation. And so Dad began studying that stuff, which is why he started cave diving. He's trained with a really, I can't think of the guy's name anymore, but pretty renowned diver, there in Gainesville. Dad got heavy into it. And I think in the last 3 or 4 years of his life, he logged something like over 300 dives.
Oh my
a
God.
lot of them solo, which is you would hear in diving, people be like, well, that wouldn't, that's not such a, that's not such a good thing. You don't do it like in open water diving, but cave divers are kind of expected to survive on their own. You have to be self-sufficient because, there a lot of times you can't help.
Well, you can't fit two people in those.
Yeah, it's not unheard of to dive solo because it that's just the nature of the situations. And so, but Dad, I get a lot of this secondhand now. I mean, of course, my earliest memories were we were always at one of the springs,
Right.
Places like Jenny Springs were like my second home. We'd be there like on a Wednesday night.
Right.
That's Mom's like, you don't remember your dad we'd go, he'd dive 2 and 3 times a week. We'd be heading out to, and we'd go all over North Florida with Wakulla, he died, anyways, jumping ahead. The cave system that he passed away in was called Peacock Slough. It's out towards Live Oak.
Okay.
And he and several guys from the university and some of his other dive buddies were mapping a lot of the systems, and they had all become pretty accomplished divers over the several years, because that was kind of the dawning of the whole cave diving thing in the early 70s. They built all their own gear.
Okay.
And they were sort of making the rules as they went. A really famous cave diver who just passed away a few years ago, a guy named Wes Skiles. Wes was actually a teenager, and he knew my dad. My dad taught him how to map cave systems.
Okay.
And so I've gotten a lot of this stuff from Wes. Wes told me all about my pops. He's like, oh gosh, he said, I was scheduled to go dive with your dad the week that he passed away.
Wow. So it was a diving accident?
Yeah, it was a diving accident. He was in Peacock Slough, and he had 2 partners. Dad had a 3rd tank. He had more air capacity than they did, and he just wanted to push a little farther into this one cavern, so where they would lay line. They would tie lines off with markings along it, so you've got your light, you can find your way in and out. And as you're and then they'd, of course, the divers, and his big thing was he would do maps of the system and then give those to the state to publish, for other divers. Because the big problem in the 70s, you had a lot of yahoos just that didn't know anything, and maybe throwing a tank going into a hole. Fortunately, Dad and all his buds were pretty heavy on training, and that was their big thing. But still, still the prevailing attitude was like, if you're doing this at all, you're an idiot. Doesn't matter how well trained you are.
It's so dangerous.
That's it. And Dad wrote a lot of articles. I've got a whole box of stuff where he would go back and forth with editorial things on, in the Gainesville Sun with people. And see, he was a lobbyist too, because of the engineering thing. He was involved when the Cross-Florida Barge Canal, they were going to do a Panama Canal through the Ocala Forest. Dad was part of the team that went to Washington to lobby against that, because by the time of his death, he had become Gainesville's pollution and control director.
Okay.
So he basically kind of was like the city's environmental engineer, and so that was why he was so passionate about that, because he's diving all these water systems. He's like, this is your water supply, and it's right underneath you. Don't dump things in holes because it's going into your water supply.
Yeah.
So it's just the Peacock Slough thing just happened. It just turns out Peacock Slough is one of the largest cave systems in the world.
Okay.
It's like it's like third to one in the Yucatan stuff. And basically he, what they think happened is that he just got off the line in some way and couldn't find his way back on it, man. And they carried plexiglass slates and charcoal pencils because you could write underwater.
Okay.
And that's how they just write notes to each other and show things. The other two guys had turned back, and so Dad was by himself, and he just, they said it, all we know of it is he wrote on the thing, got lost, tell Carolyn Thomas I love him.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things I'm very proud of him. He's doing what he loved, and it's crazy though, we think about it, he was 36. And I'm like, here I am. I'm a decade older already.
How old were you when that all happened?
6 years old.
6 years old. Do you have like?
Oh yeah, I've got.
Memories
it's kind of like me. That's why it's funny for me with Bryant. I think about it because once Bryant's 4.5 now, and
your son,
and that's the thing, is to see that interaction. And I have funny memories with Dad. Like I remember my first concert. I went with he and my mom to see Johnny Cash in Alligator Alley. That's the old Florida gym. Right behind the stadium.
Okay.
And, just weird things. I remember playing basketball with him out, behind our trailer, and when they were building the house, because Dad and Mom literally designed and built that crazy double A-frame thing. And so it, there was just, there's the weird stuff. Like I can't remember what his voice sounded like. I can't remember much of anything he said, but I have like these vivid pictures of like him, like being on trips with him, when he'd be diving, or remember him coming. The one that always stood out for me is I still remember him often coming home from work. I just like afternoons, you're a kid, you're excited.
Sure,
kind of thing. So it's very vague. I think.
But still, that must have had a profound effect on you as a kid.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I
think on a lot of ways. I think some things like you guys always, you and Nick's always say to me about being how driven I am. Well, I definitely think and I'm a chip off the old block from from people that I know that tell me, good and bad. The old thing about my dad, everyone's like, incredible leader, everyone would follow him, also his own worst enemy. Very, very caustic mouth. This is sound like says exactly what's on his mind. Everybody I know that knew my pops and has known me in some capacity is like, man, you're your dad,
Yeah.
So it's cool. I don't know that like everyone talks about him losing him is like, of course, sure. Do I wish he had been? I could grow up with him, of course. But I look at so many of my friends who've dealt with divorce, friends who, some things you and I've talked about.
Yeah.
It's like, man, y'all have gone through harder stuff. Heather's mom, left her when she was 2.
Sure.
My dad was just doing what he loved and died.
Yeah.
We all have to go. And it never bothered me that way. Of course, did I miss him? Oh, sure, of course.
Right.
The only thing I really struggled with is I had a hard time about my mom because I was so afraid of something happening to her.
Right.
So, man, I went through a phase, and when I was probably 9, 10 years old, and, Mom would we lived in a neighborhood where we had a lot of friends around and stuff. She'd go out with a friend or, whatever, maybe someone she was dating. And just before she met my stepdad, and man, she was going to be home at 11.
Right.
And I was happy. I liked to stay home alone, I'd had sitters and stuff, and we weren't, but man, I used to sometimes, I would just start worrying about it.
Yeah.
If she was late getting home, and it's like I really went through these just panic attacks about it.
I think all kids have that, because I remember having that with my parents. Like when they'd leave me at my grandparents' house, and they'd be going on vacations, and I'd be terrified, terrified that something's going to happen. Yeah, definitely. So
I think too, both of us different, where you've got reasons where you really understand how valuable your parents are to you. I think some kids live in kind of a very very traditional family type setting. Everybody's got their issues, of course, but it's interesting because I've had that conversation with a lot of friends where it's like, yeah, man, it kind of, you just start to realize mortality. Like, man, I am so dependent on you.
Yeah, at 6 or 7.
Yeah, it does. It does kind of traumatize them a little. That's my number one goal for my kids. Is like, God, if I could just let them just kind of have the innocence of youth. Don't sweat it. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. So, your mom raised you on her own for a while.
Yeah, she pretty much from the time I was 6 till I think Mike. She met my stepdad. Mike Gibson. Probably first met Mike when I was maybe 12. I was just right around teenager, and and he's pretty much, then he once he came into our life, they're funny. They never formally got married. Eventually Mom started wearing a ring years later. So it was a standing joke.
He's a good guy.
Oh yeah, he's a good man. I mean, I consider he's my dad. It's like, I mean, of course I've always loved my father and everything, but Mike's, he's been there.
Right.
And he's just it's cool too, because it's kind of funny in that regard. The only person in my family had anything to do with music. I mean, this is kind of true. My entire side of my mom's family, I don't know if anyone plays an instrument.
Really?
And Mom's got 5 sisters.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a bunch of cousins. I don't think anyone even, maybe some of them did. They probably did, maybe like, the typical, took some piano.
Right.
It is the most unmusical family.
Yeah.
They're all super smart people. They're all degree in this. We got a lot of nurses. Lots of nurses, lots of, engineers, like very, very educated family. But none of them get music.
Yeah.
And then on my dad's side, it was a small family. It was just my dad and his sister. So I only have one aunt, my Aunt Cornelia. And that's, and my grandfather was, car dealer. Nobody was... Dad played drums. It was just a hobby.
Did he really?
For him.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So,
And that's a matter of fact, the drums, those little drums that are down in the basement that are Bryant's, those, a couple of them are the 4-tom. I think the bass drum on that is actually the 4-tom from the last kit my dad had.
You're kidding. Okay.
And then the rack tom is the 4-tom on Bryant's kit. So yeah, I still have that kit that was in the house when I was growing up. Dad played in college, putting himself through college. That's played in a dance band. Okay. But he was, I've have seen pictures of him. I have vague memories of him playing. I don't think he was real serious about it.
Right.
He loved, my thing is if I hear CCR, I think about my dad.
Okay.
That's the first music I heard in the house was, Down on the Corner, man, Willie and the Po' Boys. It's that's the stuff that immediately makes me think of my pops.
So in a non-musical family, how did you get started?
That's the thing. It's kind of funny, man. The drum set was just in the house, and I always felt like as a kid, it was weird. I felt pulled to it. And yet I couldn't stand how it sounded. To go to the drums, I didn't understand. I literally did not understand the idea of creating a pattern, like a beat that you played the bass drum with the hi-hat and the snare. I really didn't. I didn't even know how they worked together.
Right.
I used to set it up with just everything side by side, like one thing after I hit this, and I hit that, and I'd hit this, and go around the kit.
Yeah.
Because Nick's always talks about playing when he was real young. I really didn't. It was more like furniture. I was more interested in racing my bike, playing football. I was not but I always felt this kind of weird pull, I'm going to do that someday.
Huh.
I really sincerely, and I do remember when Mom and I moved into Woodgate Manor out there on Tower Road. We moved there a couple of years after my dad died. We sold the house and kind of moved into town. This house was in 4th grade.
Okay.
I finally started kind of playing along to records, but it wasn't with the drum set. I would come to the couch like this. I would sit with a chair and I'd lay these guys because I couldn't stand drums. The drums sounded so bad compared to what's on the record. They're real boingy, and the cymbals made all this clang. They didn't sound anything like this nice psh on the album. I didn't understand what they're doing and recording.
Right.
So I thought, man, I like to hit things and do stuff. And there were a pair of sticks that had been my dad's. So I would pound on these pillows. I'd be back and forth, and I don't know what I was doing. I was It wasn't until I went to Idlewild Middle School Idlewild Elementary, and during 4th and 5th grade, I met a guy, Jeff Boyd, and Jeff had played in his church.
Okay.
But he was dirt poor. African American guy, incredibly talented musician. Just had it. He had that thing. And our music teacher, ironically, lives here in Nashville now. A guy named Joe Hurst. Oh, he's come out to the Douglas Corner jams. The guy who really got me started lives here.
He's still around?
Oh yeah, he's here in Nashville. He had just gotten out of the University of Florida. Was his first gig as a music teacher, and he tells me now, because we've stayed in touch. We're Facebook friends, and he's come to several of the Loud Jam things. He's come to the Drummer Jam stuff. Joe basically told me, he says, "Man, you kids saved my job." He said, "I had no clue what I was doing. And here I am, this general music teacher at an elementary school." He says, particularly your mom. He says, because she came in, talked to me one day, said, "Thomas likes the drums. He doesn't really understand it." And Mr. First told her, Joe said, "Well, this Jeff Boyd is such a talented young drummer, but he doesn't have drums." And my mom's like, "Well, we've got drums, and Thomas wants to play, but he doesn't really he doesn't know what to do." Yeah. So maybe let's just bring the drums in and let Jeff play them. Sure. So we brought him to school and kept my drum set at school the whole year of 4th grade, either 4th, maybe it was just 5th. Might have just been 5th, but anyways, we're playing like Chic, Freak Out.
Yeah.
So that's the first stuff I ever played. Hence why, people all these years have always talked to me about groove and my feel.
That's not a shock to me.
It wasn't like I was sitting around thinking, Chic, oh, no, Rogers, I just liked that music. It felt good.
And,
being the white kid from West Gainesville, and I'm hanging with the brothers from East Gainesville that are totally going, nah, man, check this. And I remember we used to have these drum battles then on the tables in class. It was always, over here, So I was trying to keep up, but at the same time, we'd also be arguing the who had the greatest drum set ever, because Peter Criss and Kiss are huge at this time, and he's got 67 pieces. No, man, he got 73. So really, I credit that whole like Ottawa experience. That's really where I started my interest in music, and then I did kind of from there that started kind of leading. Like I did band in middle school.
Okay.
I mean, this is the thing, and I know you could relate to this because I know you've got that calling too. I mean, dude, I used to I'd get in the shower. I still remember doing this. And I'd be like, get out of the shower, like pull the curtain back. And I'd be like thinking to myself like I'm on stage. Now, Lord knows, even young, I knew I couldn't sing.
Naked on stage.
Yeah, naked. I'm on stage. But I just always had that feeling. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be famous. That was never it. It was just like, I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
I'm going to entertain people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the same exact thing, man, and it's weird because
it's like you can't. It's beyond. It has nothing to do with a choice. It's just like I've got to do this.
Right. That's actually come up a lot in a lot of these talks I've had with people. Like it's just okay,
and it's innate, man. You don't know why. It's not really. It's not. I mean, even at a young age, I kind of knew this probably isn't a good path to go in terms of like when you look at like what your family does and what everyone says what people value. That,
sure.
If you do this, you'll have a nice, safe existence. You'll make this much money. Right. You'll take these vacations.
My parents owned an Italian bakery. Yeah. Like it was like a mom and pop, business, and so like they were big business people and that. But my dad played sax.
Exactly.
So, there was always music in the house. So it was kind of like one of those things. And actually at one point I was feeling the pressure to take over the family business because, like I guess as a, this was my dad and it was like, I just kind of thought maybe they're expecting me to do this. Yeah. And he pulled me aside and said, this isn't for you. This isn't what you want, because he always wanted to play the horn. He was pissed that he had to be at the bakery. Right. But he was being responsible and had a family and was doing the thing. But he pulled me aside and said, you know what? I don't want you to feel pressure on this. Yeah. You should play. If you want to play, you should go play.
How cool is it?
So I credit that with, credit my dad with a lot of the,
and what a neat thing to come with somebody who truly walked his talk. He took care of his business and was an artist. Yeah. I have so much respect because and I know you can relate. Like, when people come up to me at shows and they're like, oh man, I'm just, I just play. I'm not a professional or anything. I'm like, man, don't say that about yourself, dude. None of us, I said, I have so much admiration for people who've chosen to do something else.
Sure.
But they're really, really passionate about playing and singing
and they still make the time to do it with everything else they have going on. Yeah.
And all too often are really good.
Exactly.
I've met some of the best, most talented people I know who didn't do it for a living.
Exactly. Yeah. That's nuts. Did you have a band or anything like a rock band growing up, or did you have any kind of band?
Yeah, I didn't really start doing any. I think the first time I ever did that wasn't until beginning of high school, because I played in the middle school band at Howard Bishop. I started band in 6th grade. I didn't really dig it because it's just so mind-numbingly boring as a percussionist. It's just like
yeah, right.
But the very first band I ever played in tried to do Tom Sawyer. Tried being the emphasis. Okay. And somehow we got booked again, Gainesville. But the singer in the band's dad was like the president of a bank. Oh, you know who his sisters were? You'll know them. That's the Double Mint girls, the twins. Cynthia and Brittany Daniel.
Joe Dirt.
Yeah. Brittany. Okay, they were little 7-year-olds. I used to practice in their garage, and the girls, Brittany and Cynthia, would get on the drums and bang. Well, their older brother Brad was the singer in my first band.
Oh, funny. Okay.
I mean, I was more like it's his band, and this guy Danny. I can't think of Danny.
What kind of music were you guys doing?
We were doing, man. It was like we'd do such an odd mix. We'd do like Tom Petty. Of course, you're in Gainesville.
Of course,
you can't do that. But we do Rush. We do like Robert Plant, like Big Log.
Like
Loverboy. I think I was always pestering them in that period. What was it I really liked? It wasn't. No, Mr. was later. I can't remember. I'm sure something with the Police, because I've been a Police freak my whole life. As early as I really started. And it was just weird. But that Rush thing, that very first party was a keg party out in Micanopy. And we were so bad. that somebody pulled the power cord on us, like while we were playing. And we were like halfway through the Rush song, and I was like sick to my stomach. I was so nervous. Like I was so scared, because back then I had friends my age who were in good, being, hypothetically speaking, sure. I guess, or whatever. They were good garage bands, and we were not a good garage band. We were called Livewire. But the funniest thing is that band, we stayed together for a couple of years. This is probably in my, 9th, 10th. And by 11th grade, by 15, I think I was 15 in there, because I was pretty young. I graduated when I was barely 17. I was 16 most of my senior year. But we had, I had pretty much finished up with BMX. Like I won that Grand National and started to do drum. I was like, I'm going to march drum corps. I was getting more serious about drums through high school, because I was playing in drumline. And I started, and Gainesville had a good band. So, and so they, but the band, we actually kind of hung together, and we started to get a little better things. We'd play like at Buholtz. The funny thing was, one of our big break gigs, we got to open for this band Scorcher. Well, who's the lead singer of Scorcher? Ken Block.
Ken Block from Sister Hazel. Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Ken and I, now mind you, Ken and I had already been playing Boys Club football together years before. We knew each other from sports. I played on the same team with Jeffrey, the one that running through the fields, his brother that passed away.
Oh, yeah.
Jeffrey and I were teammates, both played on the same defense in my last year of Boys Club football. Okay. So that's kind of my initial.
That's how you met Ken and Andrew.
I met Ken, and I met Andrew actually. They didn't know each other back then. Andrew was at Gainesville High. Ken and I were more from West Gainesville. Andrew was more in like kind of central Gainesville, suburban. But that was funny, because we opened for Scorcher, and Scorcher's thing was they did tons of Tom Petty. I mean, that's what Ken was great at. They do 8-10 Tom Petty songs,
right? But
we'd play these keg parties at the Legion Hall, which is there on East University, with a bunch of high school kids. Obviously not going to happen these days.
No,
this is the 1980s, dude. I'm talking, they're huge. Like there's a guy, Wally Gator, that used to do these parties. There'd be 1,000 people.
You're kidding.
At these parties. They were massive. The West Farm parties are legendary. There was another band that Kim went on to sing in years later called Redline. But the original incarnation of Redline, they were a bunch of PK Young guys, and they were good. They were probably the best garage band I ever saw in Gainesville. I mean, when I say garage band, these guys could play. They were doing Scorpions, and they sounded like it. 2 guitar players, great drummer. The drummer and rhythm guitar player were brothers, and they were from like up your way.
Okay.
They had more New Yorker, badass rockers.
Yeah.
And then the bass player, was like good stoner dude.
I knew Ken was a rocker back in the day.
Oh yeah, God, Ken was all about some rock. Yeah, and he was screaming, and it's just so funny. And he always wore. But the thing is his style never fit. That was Ken struggled with. It's so ironic, because it's what makes Sister Hazel. Yeah, this whole kind of that he always struggled, and that's why we could relate. I did too. Neither one of us were like hairband guys. Yeah, Ken struggled with he really wanted to do more of a Tom Petty-ish kind of thing, and a guy like me, I wasn't that interested in all the hairband stuff. I loved like the Police, the Fix, Missing Persons. I loved like New Wave, Susie and the Banshees, and but there was no one doing that kind of stuff in North Florida. I mean, there were some college bands that but I didn't connect with that. So it was just kind of funny, because that was the deal with Ken, is that we would play those parties together in high school, and then I started marching drum and bugle corps out of a group out of Miami. Okay. I got turned on to through my drum instructors, and then also auditioned and got, in my senior year of high school, I got a spot as a student musician at Disney World. And that was sort of the point of entry for me, where I got real serious about playing the kit. Like all of a sudden, because I wasn't even all through high school, I was like the worst drum set player out of our drum line. I mean,
really?
Oh yeah, easy. All I did is jammed along to like Katrina and the Waves, Walking on Sunshine, and I played to the radio. I didn't play to albums. I would just put on the radio and change channels, because I pretty much just said, screw this, I'm going to lock myself in a room, and every afternoon after school and play along to records, and I'm going to figure this out. Right. And so that's why I love people like Terry Bozzio so much. It's not that I'm necessarily a huge fan of him as a drummer now, but I could relate to his playing. I didn't care about John Bonham. I didn't care about Neil Peart. Not at that time. Right. Stuart Copeland, Terry Bozzio, players of that ilk, and all the R&B guys. That's what I could relate to. Okay. I didn't care about technical. Just even though Stuart was technical, there was something about Stuart's playing. Just my ear caught it. Yeah. I didn't understand Bonham. I didn't understand that kind of. That playing style, right? And it didn't appeal to me. Like all my buddies were Van Halen freaks. They knew every Van. I hated Van Halen. I was like, it wasn't until I heard Mean Streets, I was like, ooh, now I like that. Yeah, all that early, I just didn't dig it, And so it's just kind of funny.
I think the people that I gravitate to musically too are like that. They're technical, but they don't make it sound technical.
Exactly.
And when you sit down, like you sit down and try to learn something, and you go like John Mayer does that to me all the time, where you go, that sounds really simple. Oh, it couldn't be much. And you sit down and try to learn it, and you go, oh my God,
John
this is like
a wonderful example of that.
Yeah.
It's intelligent design. You know, it's
exactly.
like we were talking about earlier with pop. It's why I love Seal. It's why I love Sting. Roland Orzabal with Tears for Fears.
Yes, yeah.
Those kind of you know, and it's funny. I find how day to day I don't do a good job. Even though I love to use Spotify, there's a whole bunch of new groups that I dig. You know, when you hear like Ed Sheeran.
Oh God,
love that guy, man. He's incredible.
Amazing.
You know, it's those kind of groups. You know, of course, I love the one. Is it One Republic? What's his name? Ryan Tedder.
Ryan Tedder from One. Yeah, he's amazing as well. Yeah.
Now, here's a funny thing as an aside on that, not to totally digress, but you know, Mark Oglesby, his manager is my buddy. I've been buddies with Mark. I owe Mark for a lot of gigs I've gotten here in Nashville. He used to tour manage Emerson Drive.
Really?
And he and Ryan grew up together.
So he manages Ryan Tedder.
He's Ryan's guy.
Wow.
It's he and Corin Capshaw. But what the deal was that Ryan came to him as his career was really taking off. You know, he already had been so successful as a songwriter, but then as an artist, the One Republic thing, he was having issues with his tour manager, and Mark was working in the office for Emerson Drive, kind of doing their management company.
Okay.
And he said, man, I need you out here. So Mark went out and started tour managing, and then just one night Ryan's like, look, I let my manager go. I want you to take over. And Mark's like, dude, I am not qualified to do this at this juncture. And you know, to know Mark, he's a super cool guy. I mean, we're such buddies. He had my mountain bike for like 7 months. I just left it with him, you know, and he took it on the road and stuff. And so Mark goes, look, I will do this, but you have to I've got to take you to somebody who really has the oomph. He said, your career is too big. And so he said, yep, said absolutely. And that's when Mark calls up Corin Capshaw. Corin's like, heck yeah, come on down. He says, we'll bring you on board. So then I guess I don't know Mark's exact relationship with that now, but I think he became one of, you know, the red light team basically.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's just kind of a cool aside. But
man, it blows my mind the different people that like, you know. That's the whole.
It's just like you're saying, you know. I mean, look at how this whole thing's come together for you.
Well, the whole impetus for the show, was like, okay, you know. I mean, I started kind of taking stock of the friends that I had, and I went, all right. I've got a lot of really talented friends. I've also got a lot of really talented friends who are very successful in what they do and are doing things in a lot of different areas. Yeah. But everybody, I mean, just people that I want to talk to. Like one of the guys who lived in my neighborhood is actually the head writer for General Hospital and was a head writer on One Life to Live and is like Emmy award-winning writer. And at some point, I like to sit down with him. His name is Ron Carlovati, and he's done really, really well for himself. And I'm like, wow, there's that guy. Another one of my buddies from high school is one of the top ad execs in the world. There's another guy I'd like to sit down and talk with.
You grow up in a place like Rochester that's that's the thing about Gainesville. People don't understand these intellectual centers. There's so many really unique, forward-thinking people of all different stripes.
Yeah, well, I mean, for that matter, I'd love to sit down with Ken Block at some point, or Stan, or like any of those guys, Stan Lynch. You know, I mean, I met all these people through, you know, just being around, and so it's like it's crazy to me. I was talking with Chris Nix about this with how, you know, these people that you just meet and you just get along with and you hang out with, it suddenly are like, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, well I'm now, I mean, I'm in Nashville largely because you and Chris sort of kicked my ass into, you know, and
it's the same for us. I mean, it's, you know, Chris always says to me, oh, you got me up here. Yeah. I'm like, well, I mean, all it is it's just going, man, I want to be around my buddies, and you know, and you're like, and I'm looking around going, you guys are as good as any of these people. You know, I mean, and you bring things to the table they don't.
Sure.
You know, and that's what Sizemore used to always get in my ear. He'd be like, man, just move up here. Yeah. You know, because I was still kind of back and forth, and I'd come up here, and you know.
So how did that was Jack the guy that got you kind of coming to Nashville to do stuff, or?
Well, I think the whole thing with that was more. We had done so many of the bands in Florida. You know, all the stuff we had done together that when.
Well, yeah, let's back up and talk about the House of Dreams. How did that was your band with Jack Sizemore and Brendan Cameron?
I'll try not to go too far back, but kind of the connecting there is, like I said, knowing Jack from the store and stuff. We had became friends. Jack was always in like all the cool garage bands, like I say garage bands. They played like the real big parties. They played clubs and stuff, and that's so. we became buddies even back then. He was just kind of a big brother figure for me.
Sure.
But I left to go to work for Disney. You know, I got a full-time job at Disney like my second year of college. So
Okay.
I'd done a year of college there in Gainesville and then went to Orlando and just got into a full-time gig because I had kept doing the student musician gigs during the holidays and stuff.
Right. And
it was just weird because it was unusual for a high school guy to get one of those gigs. I just kind of lucked out and landed a spot. So doing that and playing, I kind of got out of the band scene in Gainesville for a few years and just immersed myself in Orlando, went and did cruise ships. I was doing a lot of more like, you know, that type of work.
Right.
And during that time though, I'd always kind of stayed in touch with Jack, and I forget, God, and now you'd have to ask him. I forget why and how we sort of stayed. He just liked my playing, you know, and I liked him, you know, I always looked up to him, and we'd always kind of talked about, we'll play together someday, you know, we'll do something.
Sure.
And I would run across him when I'd be in Gainesville, and House of Dreams happened while I was in Orlando. The bass player I formed a band called ISIS. I not just me, but I did it with a guy named Chris Williams, and then Kevin Williams, his cousin, moved down from Texas, and we got the band started. This was like 1989. It was something we were doing on the side.
Yeah.
I was working full time, 40 hours a week, and during the day playing in the parks at Epcot.
Okay.
You know, the Epcot Magic Kingdom and stuff. But at night we would play all the rock clubs around Orlando.
Okay.
And the guys had aspirations to, you know, they were songwriting, and there was the guy who would become the bass player in House of Dreams, Jeff Coffey, was in ISIS because Jeff and I had been student musicians together. He played trombone out at Magic Kingdom, but he also played bass. A really good singer. And so I'd always wanted to do a band with Jeff. We talked about it for several years.
Right.
And so that's how ISIS came into being. And it started to really take off. We won all these Battle of the Bands in Orlando. And before we know it, we're playing 5 nights a week, different clubs. I was like, I was tired as hell because I'd be playing till 2 or 3 in the morning, then be out at the parks during the day, playing all day at Epcot, and then back in the club playing that night.
Yeah.
And so during that time, Jack and Britton were doing, Britton Cameron, you know, and Jack Sizemore, they were doing I think the band at that time was called Inside Out, but they had always done their original stuff. That's one thing about those two. They'd been songwriting and stuff back way before people thought about songwriting.
Really?
In the late 80s, they always did a ton of original material.
Okay.
And had good original material.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I mean, this is long before Ken and Andrew ever even, you know, started doing their thing. But Ken and Andrew will be the first to tell you that seeing Jack and Britton as a duo is what inspired them
into doing it.
Start doing it. And so we ran across each other. I think what happened is I eventually quit Disney in 91, and we took ISIS on the road. We started working with a company out of North Carolina, Showtime, and played all over the eastern U.S.
Well, I think we did a lot of the same clubs.
We did a lot of the same rooms.
Yeah, a lot of the same rooms.
We talked about like Flaming Mug in Fayetteville, and, you know, like up in Skippers in Tampa, or
the dock in Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi, and they're the other dock in Pensacola.
Right.
And they're up in Cincinnati. It was like Never on Sundays and McGuffey's. And I mean, those are all like that circuit, you know, 5 nights a week, you know.
Right.
And this is 90. For us, it was really mostly 92 and 93 were the real years.
I was after that, like a little close to 97, 98.
Yeah, and that's, we lived out. We would do 10 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
We'd come home, you know, for a week in Orlando. Come home was to play our home club in Orlando, and then the truck and motorhome would turn right around and head back out.
Yeah.
You know, and that's...
Well, I was, in my situation with Exploding Boy, we did three, it was like close to 300 dates a year.
Yeah, you just had to stay working.
Yeah, you're right. Otherwise, you know, and we'd be home.
It's like sharks.
Well, right.
Come home for Christmas.
Right. I tell people, I'm like, you know, because I moved from New York down to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, you lived in D.C. I said, no, I had a house where I kept my shit, but I didn't.
Exactly.
I didn't really live there.
You know, we went on the road with ISIS and did that, and then I ran across Jack and Britton. We played out at what would now be downtown Disney, back then Pleasure Island.
Yeah.
Everything. ISIS and their band Inside Out were booked on the same event on opposite stages, and Jack and Britton freaked out when they saw Jeff and I together as a rhythm section, and they knew we were getting kind of tired of the cover band thing. And I mean, ISIS was a blast. I mean, my God, we'd play everything from Queensryche and Rush to Toto to Styx to Neil Diamond. I mean, we'd play in like Biloxi casinos, you know, the early ones that were just starting out. So we kept doing the band all the way through 95, I want to say. But at the same time, in 93, after seeing each other, we talked and said, hey, man, we ought to get together and just try something. Yeah. And now I remember what was happening. Jack and Britton had been offered a record deal with this little label out of Atlanta called Ichiban Records.
Remember Ichiban?
Remember Dead Eye Dick?
I do, yeah.
Their album, our album, whatever. I mean, they had written all the material, but we recorded it together. And we actually recorded it with John Kurtzwig, who produced Creed.
I remember John Kurtzwig, yeah.
So John was New Jack in Britain. Like and they knew him, he was kind of nobody. He was just in Tallahassee. He had this little recording rig in his kitchen. And so we did the album with him for Ichiban. That's how House of Dreams came about. And that would be 93, I think 93, 94. I'd have to look on the album cover.
Okay.
But it really sounded great. I mean, that's got Stan's attention. A lot of people were like, man, this band's really good.
Yeah.
But again, which would end up being now, looking back, was always the House of Dreams thing. We couldn't draw flies we played good together. The guys sang great, but we didn't connect with audiences. There were people that really loved us, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But we were never like the buzz band. Like we were never... The other bands always loved us. Man, you guys are good.
Yeah.
But audiences, there were just elements. We were almost too much about the music.
Okay.
Britton, Jack, me, Jeff, we were all so serious about the music that we kind of didn't have enough showmanship.
Okay.
In that way. And so that whole thing with the Ichiban run, we got offered the opportunity to open for Hootie and the Blowfish, and it was right as Cracked Rear View was coming to market.
Wow. Okay.
Just before it exploded. Yeah. And so we were their opening act we were booked for like 20 dates with them, and we did about 5 around the Southeast, and we get a call from our manager, and he's like, hey guys, we're not going to be playing with Hootie anymore. They're like, their album's taken off. They're going out with Melissa Etheridge. And it was like, we were supposed to be playing the House of Blues with them in New Orleans the next weekend. I was like, dang.
Oh, God.
So they got picked up on Melissa Etheridge's tour. And of course, they bypassed all that.
Her.
They went right through the roof. And so that kind of petered out, the whole Ichiban thing. And I think that was the time, though, that I was getting heavily into. While I was doing that with the guys, I had now rekindled with Ken and Andrew. They had started up the early incarnations of Sister Hazel.
Okay.
Different drummer, different guitar player, but it was the basic. It was Jet, bass player.
Yeah, okay.
It was Jet, and then Ryan was playing in a band called Black Creek, and Mark had just gotten back. I got them Mark. I knew Mark when he was in high school down in Tampa, and his dad and I got talking. I ran into him at an event when I was, because during this time, now mind you too, while I'm doing this, I'd also had hooked up in Orlando and started playing for the Backstreet Boys. So that was, okay. I'm playing for House of Dreams with the deal, but I'm still doing dates with ISIS. A couple of us would sub it out. And then I had Mark Goff, who was Backstreet Boys vocal coach and stuff. He and I worked together at Disney.
I took a few lessons with Mark.
Yes, you know Mark.
I
exactly.
do Mark, yeah.
And Mark invited me out to the audition. He said, man, there's this boy band I'm doing stuff with. They've got backing. It pays well. And so I ended up in that gig too. So I was kind of simultaneously playing in House of Dreams, ISIS, and Backstreet Boys. And then during that same period, the What It Is band, you've heard me talk a lot about.
Yeah.
They were being formed in Gainesville. And Britton kept telling me, man, there's this band, Tom. It's so you. He says, I hate to tell you because I think you'll end up going and playing with them.
Well, I think that's what I've always respected about what you do is that you were diversified from the get-go.
Always.
And for me, I started as, singer-songwriter, guitar player.
But see, I admire that because I rarely have ever had a creative thought, in terms of, hey, I've got this thing I want to share with the world.
Well, that's the thing, though, is Nashville forced me to diversify.
Right.
To come here and say, okay, you know what? I'm probably not, I can still do my records, I can still be an artist, I can still do that whole thing, but I will work more if I'm sort of a chameleon and go, okay, I'm going to play this country gig, I'm going to do this pop gig, I'm going to do this rock gig, I'm going to do that. And I think some people shortchange themselves on their careers by
saying either or.
Well, right.
Yeah, you don't have to say, it doesn't mean you have to give up what you do. If anything, it's opening all kinds of other ancillary opportunities.
Exactly.
To you.
Well, I'm seeing that with right now.
Case in point.
It feels like my whole life is converging upon, everything's converging
it's
upon.
Like all that work you've done. I'm a huge believer in that. If you keep yourself in the game and you don't worry about your preconceptions of where you should be, but just let life take you where, as long as you're putting good effort in.
Exactly.
You're working, because like when we talked earlier about the Tracy thing, I was at a point there, literally had the conversation with David Black. I don't know if you've met Dave. That's the one. He's Easton Corbin's drummer.
Okay.
I had just had a conversation with him. He had told me he got the Easton gig, and I was teasing him. I was like, man, I'm so jealous because Easton's from Trenton,
Okay,
he grew up
yeah.
outside of Gainesville.
Yeah.
He went to UF. He's a huge Gator fan. I was like, that's the guy I want to play drums for. And then we just were talking, and I was kind of down in the dumps that day, and I was like, man, I'm so happy for you, David. I said, I don't know who'd want to hire my old butt at this point. I said, I just don't feel like I never hear about things. I don't, because guys will always say, Tom, if you hear about any work, I'm like, dude, I don't know about anything. I'm not that connected like that.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the next day, I'm walking out of that drum lesson, and the phone rings for Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like when you least, it's the old.
Well, when you least expect it, exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, but it's like where preparation meets opportunity. It's
Absolutely.
like there's spent a lot of time spent preparing.
That's the thing. I mean, the one thing I know I've done, I've never, with rare exception, I mean, there's been a stretch or two here where I was substitute teaching a lot that I really slipped back. I mean, I had even some guys would get in my ear, Rich Redmond, Jim Riley, they'd be kind of like, Tom, what are you doing? Man, you need to be out in the mix more. You got to be playing. And I'm like, well, man, I've got this family now, and I'd be substitute teaching like every day of the week, and they're going, dude, how are you going to do how are you ever going to get on a session, or how are you going to get on things? Because you're, and they had a good point. You're like, I'm chasing my tail over $70 or $80 a day.
Yeah.
When I'd probably be better served to get out there and just pound the flesh, and really let people know I'm around and available. But that's just never been my MO. I've always believed that life's going to put me where I need to be as long as I just keep all irons in the fire.
Sure.
You can't just sit at home and stare at the wall.
That's what I mean, I have so much respect for that with you. And it's, you're, since I've moved to town, I mean, again, you and Chris Nix are the part of a huge reason why I'm here. Because otherwise I was down in Florida just chasing my tail. But, I've run into people, and I think I told you about this. I've run into people different places, like drummers or other musicians, and I always kind of reference you and Chris. I'm like, because to try to find a point of reference of like, who do you know? And I always say, do you know Tom Hurst or whatever? And even though some people might not know you by name, there was a drummer, I forget who he plays with, big country act, and I mentioned your name, and he's like, that name sounds really familiar, and I'm like, great drummer, plays with Tracy Lawrence now, and he said, oh, traditional grip guy, and I'm like, yeah, and he just went, oh, like, it's you people really respect you, man, and I don't know whether you realize that sometimes.
I'm not real good. I've never been good at taking compliments.
I know that, but
you know what I mean. It's like I do feel it. I hope so. I hope I mean. You hope you made a positive impact.
It's like you're spoken about with reverence from everybody that I've ever run into, and it's a cool thing. It's a cool thing for me. That makes me really proud.
As my brother, I mean, we're like we're lifelong friends. I mean,
exactly
in that sense, and it's the same thing. It's like it makes me so proud. That's why I'm so glad you're here. And it's the same thing with Chris. It's always I've felt the same way. I would. Because I know Nix would have those moments where, man, I just don't feel like I'm like, dude, you're too talented for the room. They don't even realize really what you're bringing to the table.
Exactly.
And I feel like the same thing with you. I think you bring so many different things because you have such depth. I mean, it does matter, man. If you go out there and kick butt live, and it's kind of cool to see it because we've always heard that thing. You beat your head against the wall trying to do great shows, and you wonder if anyone was listening.
Well, yeah.
But we're like, I've had a chance now to see with him venues where I've been to, like a place like in Denver or a place in California or in New England or somewhere where we go, and it's my second or third time there with him, and you see the place, there's like a new swell. I think one thing that all this argument about bro country, this, that, how country's not country, the cool thing is that if you're somebody like TL who's just willing to keep trying to kick butt and trying to remain relevant, keep adding new material, keep honing your craft and make your thing better, that, man, today's younger audiences that are country fans really dig it.
Are appreciating that.
They're very appreciative.
Exactly. It's like I use Tom Petty as an example of that because they kind of, they've had an amazing career, but they've kind of fall in and out of
out of vogue. Basically.
Yeah, they kind of and
but
like
they're just chugging along.
Then they just keep putting out records and doing stuff.
It's always kind of like people go, oh yeah, those guys are so cool.
Yeah,
I gotta go see them.
Right, and like I think they're coming back. It seems like Tom Petty's swinging back around at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like people are starting to go, oh yeah, I remember that. That's a great band.
That's and isn't that funny? It's like I admire that with anybody. When you see in our genre, like I think that's what Eric Church has done. That's brilliant. Those guys don't chase any trends, like you said. They're not chasing the money or anything. They do what they believe in.
Yeah.
And that's so gratifying for me because Jeff Cease, their guitar player, the one with Driver. Jeff's been like a real big brother to me here in Nashville. We played together for 3 years. And both with Trent and with Bucky, and I learned so much from Jeff just about kind of how to not get too caught up in trying to chase your tail and be everything for Nashville. It's good to be a professional. It's good to be.
Yeah.
I can think of guys flash across my, as I say this, I can see players on every instrument who I so admire, man. They nail everything they do. You know, when I think of like a Timmy Galloway, Rich Redman, you know, Jim Riley, like I said, I mean, there's so, you can just go on and on and on. Younger, new guys like Mark Poise. I mean, people that like, they're just always going to deliver. They're going to kick butt.
Yeah.
You know, but you also have to, at the same time, not worry about trying to be them. You got to be yourself.
You have to be yourself. That's exactly it.
See, now, I credit Jack and Britton with that in a big way, because coming back to the House of Dreams thing, that's one thing. They always stuck to their guns about what they loved, what they were writing. It wasn't like they were like, oh, I don't do this. They're just like, man, this is just what we believe in, and this is what, you know, we feel.
Yeah.
And, you know, after doing all those band things like we talked about in the 90s, that was the weirdest thing for me, is I almost felt like, am I done with music? You know, because and I remember thinking to myself, like, man, no, dude, you're, you know, and it's around the time I met you. I was like, I've got these other things I want to do. I really want to finish school. I really want to knock some of these things out. These are sort of the bucket list things.
Yeah.
And that's around the time I met you. That's like, it was why it was so great to meet Greg Ema as well, because again, it was guys that were very passionate about music, but it was neat. As much as it might not have been satisfying for all of us we would have loved to have been in bigger settings, it was kind of a perfect time to just like get with like-minded dudes and play music together a lot and grow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at that. I look at the time that you and Chris and I played at Dirty Nellies in Gainesville.
Yeah.
As just one of
so formative.
Oh God, it was amazing. I mean, I learned a lot.
Well, think about some of those magical nights. I mean, we had nights where it just was like on fire, and we couldn't. It wasn't anything we did. It just would happen. You'd just be so in the moment. And you kind of look, I know we'd look at each other at the end of the night like, wow, that was cool.
Well, right. And Chris Nix had an interesting, when I talked to him, I think it was like last week or something about that whole thing. I was referencing the new gig with Joe Denham that I got into with the you know, being humorous and allowing the sense of humor to come into it. Because there's a lot of people that take themselves way too seriously.
Absolutely.
And I'm
guilty of that.
Well, I mean, you know, we've all done it. I did it. I mean, for years. That's what I've you know, I write very serious.
You're pouring your heart out.
But exactly. And it's but on a day-to-day basis, when I, you know, in my interactions with you and Chris and my other friends, I'm a goofball. We're all goofballs. And my favorite thing about us is that we all have this sort of like a similar sense of humor on that. And,
absolutely.
And Chris was saying that on the nights when we were all in that sort of goofy place where we weren't expecting anything, were the best nights at Dirty Nellies. And the nights where we might have went in maybe taken things a little too seriously ended up being the kind of nights where some bad shit went down.
Well, it's like you just weren't. You're like musically, you're trying too hard sometimes.
Right.
And I mean, you know, I know for me, I mean, as funny as it was, I think the best nights were like, you know, and it definitely, you reacted when there were lots of pretty girls in the club.
Absolutely.
And the place had a vibe going on. I mean, because like to me, that was the thing, was like, you know, that feeling of like just anything can happen, slinging it, having a great time. Yeah. It's the party's on. And yet the great thing with us is that the three of us, no matter what's going down, whether drinks are being had or anything, we're never sacrificing the musical quality.
Oh, no.
That's the thing I so admire about you and Chris, is that no matter people could be sending up shots, but we're going to still kick your butt.
Some of those nights were like transcendent, or like it just, I really felt like in a different place. Like like we might have been on that stage physically, but we were in another plane somewhere. Because I don't know how I did some of those things back then. Like, you know, you have those moments where you do something and you go, these people on stage just brought that out of me. And
vice versa. I mean, I can remember you would kick things off and I'd have no clue what the song was, but you just instinctively know that it was going to work.
Yeah.
And we just know where we were going. And I mean, that's even, you know, talk about a transcendence. I think that was the thing when Chris and I started to do the fusion thing and wanting to do the power triplets, you know, thing. It was like, we've got to retain the sense of humor that we had with Michael, you know, of doing that kind of vibe of like, if you're gonna do it, the best musical experiences and instances, I think without question, man, it's humor.
Absolutely.
A willingness to laugh at yourself, you know?
And if you're doing that, it draws the audience in, because they see that they feel like they're part of what's going on.
And you're helping them transcend their day. I mean,
exactly.
What's our job as entertainers, is to hopefully give people a break from all the rigmarole of life.
Right.
Now, one thing I know, you and I are both on the same plane, and I love serious elements.
I
love musical situations that make me want to cry.
Absolutely.
I love that it draws a different emotion.
Right.
But there's also it's like just the yin and yang. You need a balance, a blending of things.
Yeah.
It's because it's the best in humanity of like where you find people's, they really do. There is, again, keep using the word transcendence, but you get beyond what you're capable of maybe in normal verbiage.
Yeah. Well, some of that stuff with interaction between musicians and all that kind of thing, that's not something that can be taught. That is you learn the fundamentals, you learn how to do your thing, but then you
gotta live it.
Well, then you let it go.
Yeah.
When the best things are when you're on stage with people, I mean, my best experiences have been when I'm just not thinking. It might be a nice performance if you script everything and you write out the set list and you have this is going to be this much time between songs and I'm going to say this here and I'm going to say that there. Yeah. But you if you don't leave room for that, I think it becomes less of an experience for you and less of an experience for the audience as well.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things I've thought a lot about, I'm trying to think, because I mean that I have so much admiration for some of the guys here. I know they've been like I think like Sean Paddock's been with he's been with Kenny he's been with Chesney for 17 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Jim's Riley's been with Flats their entire career. Steve Missamore has been with Dirks his entire career. They started in the bars together. I mean, there's a lot of guys here in town who've had long, long tenures. And I was thinking about it when I was like, man, I don't know that I've played with anyone. I mean, Chuck in Nashville would have been my longest gig. I mean, I was with him almost 4 years. But I mean, we worked a lot in the first 2 years. The second 2 years were kind of so, I might do 20, 30 shows a year with him, if that.
Right.
And I was trying to think back, I'd like work for people like Bucky where we did a whole bunch of stuff for like a year or so, but then I was like with him almost 2 years, and I was with Trent for like 9 months, but we did a ton of shows. In 9 months we did almost 100 shows.
Wow.
But I was just thinking about it with Tracy. It's like, man, this is the first gig I can think of maybe in my entire life like that has been so consistent.
Yeah.
I work every week.
Well, that's nice. That's nice to have that because there are not a lot of guys who get that.
Well, and the thing is, when you get into that, like, this is the one thing I could never understand. Or no, I mean, I understood it. I admired it from afar. I just knew I wasn't having this experience, and other than settings like with you and Chris and stuff somewhere that I did something regularly for a long period of time. I had never played enough with people where you get a lot of that unspoken musical intuition. Things just start happening week to week that are like, it's kind of metamorphosis. Yeah. Like arrangements happening on the fly.
Right.
And one of my favorite things about Tracy's band is that the guys, all 5 of us, and TL for that matter, are really listening. I mean, there's a ton of, there's so much little interplay off, Joe, the fiddle player, to the steel, over to Steve on keys, and Steve and I play off each other constantly, and then off Darren, and that these all become parts.
Yeah.
And that Tracy even, he like encourages us to have that kind of, it's as close to a like jazz setting as I've ever been in terms of improvisatory for a popular music situation. And it's like you said, you can't manufacture that in a rehearsal. You can't.
No,
That comes under pressure in front of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because and especially though, you have to play with people who are listening to each other, and that's like, it'd be so understandable if they were sort of just on autopilot, but they're not.
Yeah.
That's the coolest thing, and like, I admire that so much because I wonder, I'm like, if 10 years in, how will I be?
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do at all. It's not. And most people don't realize that.
Well, that's it. And even to work for somebody as an artist, Tracy's the first to tell you, he's like, oh yeah, you probably heard all the horror stories about me on drummers. I'm hard on drummers. And when I first went to work for him, I was like, man, I said, nah, really? I was like, I just, admired you from afar. I said, I'll be honest, I didn't know that much of your music. He started laughing, because I didn't know like his big, right. They're like, you don't know Alibis? I'm like, nope, never heard it. They're like, wow, yeah. Why did we hire this guy?
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of funny now looking back, but that's the thing is like, it's the same thing that you and Chris and I have had, where you have that. You start to really get that chemistry and symbiosis, because I'm definitely at a point in my life where on one side, I want to be home on weekends for Bryant for sports and things of that nature.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also love doing what I do so much. Like you said, I talk a good game about doing management and doing things, but that's why teaching is more fascinating to me, is I think I really enjoy teaching blends well with doing the road thing.
Right.
And I'm pretty fortunate in working for a guy like Tracy that, he's not showing any signs of slowing down.
Yeah.
I dig it. I would love to do it for several more years. I'm sure there'll come a point, maybe when Brett's a little older, where I'm going to be like, hey, I'd rather be home teaching and stuff. But, he's so encouraging of it. He was like excited when I went to go to this grad school thing. He's like, man, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And, and a lot of artists wouldn't be like that.
Right. Well, man, I think we're probably at, let's see, where are we at? Oh, we got like a lot of stuff.
Oh, dude, that's plenty.
But man, I thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me, and thanks for. I'm honored about the whole thing, man. I'm honored to be here in Nashville. I'm honored that I got to play in a band with you for 8 years down there in Florida and all that.
We ain't done.
I know we're not done. But man, thank you so much, Tommy. I really appreciate that. Thanks
I'm proud of you doing this.
I would say thanks for being here, but we're your house.
I should thank you. Thank you for coming over and playing with the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
On, my brother.
Thanks, man.
Cool, buddy.
I hope you guys enjoyed my talk with my friend Tom Hurst. There's a lot to take in there, so you may need to listen to this multiple times. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for checking the show out. And thanks again for the comments. Please keep those coming. Really, really love to hear what y'all think. And like I said, we have a lot of guests coming up in the very near future, so stay tuned. If you would like to check out Tom Hurst live in the flesh, you can catch him on tour with Tracy Lawrence literally everywhere. He's also a member of a band called the Power Triplets, with Trip Wamsley on the bass and my good friend Chris Nix on the guitar. The Power Triplets album Ta-Da is available on iTunes or wherever digital music is sold online. Please check that out. And if you are a student of Tommy's, Tom does a lot of teaching. If you're a student of Tom's, past or present, I hope you've kept your ears open, because there's a lot of knowledge that man has to impart on you and in the world. So I hope you're paying attention. That is about it. That does it for me this time out, guys. Thanks again so much. I'm going to leave you now with a fine example of Tom's drumming, a song from the Power Triplets record, Ta-Da. I will catch you the next time around here on Turn It On.